The air was thick with tension as Captain Arya Steele's boots crunched against the rough, alien soil of Vaklar. Her senses were immediately assaulted by the humidity, the sweltering heat pressing in from all sides. The storm clouds above swirled in a violent dance, blotting out the distant sun. It wasn't just a storm. It was the planet itself, alive and pushing back against the presence of any outsider. "Stay sharp," Arya commanded, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Behind her, the rest of her team followed closely, their weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the unfamiliar jungle. Each step felt like they were being watched. It was a feeling Arya knew well from years of combat, but this planet, this Deathworld, was different. The jungle itself seemed to hum with a dangerous energy, its massive trees shaking in the wind, their roots writhing like serpents. The Terran fleet had sent a small team to Vaklar, confident that with their technology and expertise, they could hold off any threat. Yet, as the shuttle had descended through the thick cloud cover, Arya couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far worse than any mission brief could have prepared them for. "We've got a secure perimeter," Sergeant Garrett said, his gruff voice crackling over the comms. "But, Captain, something's off. The wildlife's all wrong." Arya nodded, scanning the dense foliage. "I see it too. This place, it's alive, and not in the way we know. Keep your heads on a swivel." Despite their preparation, nothing could have prepared them for the sight ahead. The first few moments on the ground were uneventful, but then the planet's first true test emerged. A massive, insect-like creature, nearly 3 meters tall, skittered from behind a tree with terrifying speed. Its 6 legs moved in unnerving coordination, its sharp mandibles clicking as it locked eyes with them. "Take it down!" Arya shouted, already in motion. She didn't hesitate, never had. The creature lunged, its claws snapping through the air, but Arya was faster. Her blaster fire sliced through the air, hitting the creature square in the chest. It screeched in pain, thrashing wildly before collapsing into the underbrush, twitching for a final few moments before going still. "We're not alone here," Arya muttered to herself, wiping the sweat off her brow. Her team regrouped, but the unease only deepened. "First kill on Vaklar," Corporal Mara Cruz said, her voice tight with nerves. "I don't think it'll be the last." "Definitely not," Arya replied, her eyes scanning the horizon. The jungle was too quiet now. The death of the insect creature should have sent a ripple through the ecosystem, yet all was still. It felt wrong. The radio crackled to life again. "Captain, we've got movement. Multiple hostiles, incoming from the east." Arya's hand instinctively went to her sidearm as she readied herself. "Everyone, weapons ready. Stay in formation." Without warning, a cacophony of screeches erupted from the trees, followed by the sound of heavy footfalls. Something huge was coming. The first of the Varkari soldiers came into view, their armored forms cutting through the dense underbrush. Arya's eyes narrowed. The aliens were not accustomed to this kind of terrain, but their sheer numbers could overwhelm them. "Varkari," Sergeant Garrett growled, taking a step forward. "How many do we have?" "Too many," Arya muttered under her breath. The Varkari were relentless. Their prideful arrogance often blinded them to the true dangers of the galaxy, and Arya knew this would be a costly lesson for them. They set their positions quickly. Arya took the lead, with Mara by her side. The rest of the team spread out, forming a defensive perimeter as the Varkari soldiers advanced. The jungle was their ally, every tree, every vine, every shadow worked to their advantage. Arya and her soldiers were masters of this kind of warfare, striking from the shadows when the enemy least expected it. But the Varkari weren't entirely blind. They knew how to adapt. With a roar, one of the Varkari soldiers fired a massive energy weapon into the air, sending a blast that illuminated the jungle in a blinding flash of light. The explosion sent shockwaves through the ground, and the surrounding trees shook violently as the shockwave reverberated through the forest. "Get down!" Arya shouted. The explosion had thrown her off balance, and she could feel the air shift as the pressure waves surged toward them. She gripped her weapon tight, but her thoughts were focused elsewhere. This isn't just a fight for survival, this is a fight for humanity's future. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning foliage as Arya and her team moved swiftly through the underbrush. Arya led her team through the jungle with practiced precision, guiding them past dangers that the Valkyrie were too arrogant to recognize. Her heart pounded in her chest, but there was no time to waste on fear. They had to reach the comm tower before the Valkyrie could regroup and send for reinforcements. Vaklar's deadly wildlife was only the beginning. The Valkyrie had underestimated the planet's perils, but now it was their fight for survival, and Arya was about to make sure humanity would be the last one standing. "We're not letting this planet be theirs," Arya muttered, her voice unwavering as she locked eyes with Mara. "This is our home, and we'll defend it." To the last breath. Her team moved forward, determined, as the jungle seemed to close in around them. The storm raged overhead, but nothing could drown out the sound of Arya Steele's resolve. The jungle felt like a living, breathing thing, its pulsating energy surrounding Captain Arya Steele and her surviving soldiers. The humidity weighed heavy on their shoulders, and every rustling leaf or snapped twig sent a ripple of tension through their ranks. The storm, now thick and oppressive, loomed overhead, its dark clouds swirling in unnatural patterns, as if the planet itself were conspiring against them. Arya wiped the sweat from her brow, her hand trembling slightly from the exertion, but her mind was razor-sharp. She and her team had made it this far, but they were no longer fighting only the Valkyrie. Vaklar's very atmosphere had become their enemy. The planet seemed intent on turning them into nothing more than a memory, but Arya had never been one to back down. "Captain," Sergeant Garrett's voice crackled through the comms. "We're close to the comm tower. If we don't make it there in the next 20 minutes, we won't be able to call for reinforcements." "I know," Arya responded, her tone resolute. "But if we get there, we'll need to hold it long enough for the signal to go through. We don't have much time." "Understood." Arya glanced at the remnants of her team. The heavy toll of the battle was evident. Sergeant Garrett had a gash on his leg, barely patched with field med supplies, while Corporal Cruz's hands were shaking as she gripped her weapon. But their faces were set in determination. The Valkyrie may have underestimated the planet's dangers, but they were still formidable opponents, and now they were closing in. Suddenly, a high-pitched screech tore through the air, followed by the heavy footfalls of the Valkyrie soldiers, their armored boots crushing the foliage underfoot. Arya's pulse quickened. The ambush was coming. She motioned for the team to spread out. The jungle, dense and unpredictable, was both a blessing and a curse. It gave them cover, but it also obscured their movements from each other. Arya crouched low behind a massive root, her eyes scanning the battlefield. The Valkyrie were methodical, too confident in their numbers, as if they believed that sheer force could overpower everything, humans, wildlife, and the planet itself. "They're coming from the east," Cruz whispered, her voice steady despite the terror creeping into her eyes. "They've spread out. It's not good." Arya's mind raced. They needed to act quickly, but the landscape was an enemy in itself. Vaklar had no mercy. The creatures here were unpredictable, and worse still, they were aware of the presence of intruders. Something large and malevolent lurked in the shadows, watching them. "Garrett, take the north. Cruz, with me. We'll flank them from the west," Arya ordered. Garrett nodded, disappearing into the underbrush, while Cruz gave Arya a quick glance before following her lead. The ground beneath their feet was soft, the mud sticky with the weight of the planet's moisture. Arya's boots slid slightly, but her focus never wavered. The Valkyrie came into view, their heavy armor glinting under the occasional flash of lightning. They moved as a unit, unaware of the human soldiers preparing to strike. Arya held her breath, her fingers tightening around her blaster. Every step felt like it might be their last, but there was no turning back. "Now!" Arya barked. In a synchronized move, Cruz and Arya opened fire. The first two Valkyrie soldiers went down instantly, their armor unable to withstand the concentrated fire from Arya's team. But the others reacted quickly, returning fire with deadly precision. The jungle erupted in chaos as energy blasts tore through the air, lighting up the dense foliage like fireworks. Arya ducked behind a fallen tree, the ground shaking with the force of the blasts. She could feel the heat of the explosions on her skin, the sound of metal clanging and screaming in her ears. But amidst the madness, her mind remained clear. Each shot fired, each movement of her team, had to be deliberate, efficient. They couldn't afford mistakes. "Keep it tight," Arya shouted as she pressed her body against the earth, waiting for the next move. "We've got to push them back. Don't let them get close to the tower." Her heart pounded in her chest, but her voice remained calm. The Valkyrie were formidable, but the Terran forces had something they didn't: determination. Arya knew it would take every ounce of her strength, every skill she had ever learned, to survive this. But she would not fail. Not today. The battle raged on for what felt like an eternity. Arya's team continued to fight, each shot more calculated than the last. They moved swiftly, knowing the planet's wildlife could strike at any moment. And then it happened. From the corner of her eye, Arya saw it, a massive shadow moving through the jungle, far larger than anything the Valkyrie had sent. A massive creature, its body covered in thick, armor-like scales, emerged from the underbrush. Its eyes glowed with an eerie intelligence, and its enormous jaws snapped shut with a terrifying hiss. The Valkyrie soldiers, distracted by the battle with the humans, didn't notice it at first. But Arya did. She immediately raised her hand. "Fall back," she shouted, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Get to the tower now." The creature was upon the Valkyrie before they could even react. One soldier was crushed instantly, his body torn in half by the creature's massive claws. The rest of the Valkyrie scrambled, firing blindly at the predator, but their shots had little effect. The creature was too large, too powerful. "Move, move, move," Arya ordered again, her voice tight with urgency. Her team, now focused on survival, made a beeline for the comm tower. The creature's screeches echoed behind them, and the sounds of battle faded as Arya's team pressed forward. The Valkyrie were no longer their primary concern. The tower was within sight, but Arya could hear the distant rumble of more Valkyrie troops approaching. They had to get there, and fast. Just a little farther, Arya whispered to herself, willing her legs to keep moving, willing herself to hold on to the hope that they would survive this. She could feel the sweat stinging her eyes, but her determination burned brighter than ever. The battle was far from over, but they had made it. For now, they had won the first round. But the war for Valkyrie was only just beginning. The comm tower loomed ahead, a battered structure twisted by time and neglect. It stood as a monument to human ingenuity, a symbol of everything they had fought for, everything they were about to lose. The storm raged overhead, the wind howling like a beast, threatening to tear the tower from its foundations. Arya Steele's eyes were fixed on it, her thoughts sharp and deliberate. They had made it, but the worst was far from over. "Keep moving," Arya ordered, her voice calm, despite the urgency thrumming through her veins. "We don't have much time. Get to the tower. We have to hold it long enough for the signal to go through." Sergeant Garrett, limping slightly from his earlier injury, nodded without a word. Cruz was already ahead, her eyes darting back and forth, scanning the jungle for any signs of movement. The planet's deadly wildlife was now the least of their worries. The Valkyrie were regrouping, their elite soldiers coming in fast, their numbers swelling with each passing minute. Arya knew this moment was make or break. They had one shot, and the Valkyrie wouldn't let them have it without a fight. The team reached the base of the tower, the rusted metal creaking under the strain of the storm. Arya looked up, calculating. The entrance was at the top, far higher than they had expected. The climb would be brutal, but they had no choice. "Garrett, you're with me," Arya said, pointing upward. "Cruz, cover R6. Don't let them get close." "I've got you," Cruz replied, her voice steady but tight. The weight of the battle had taken its toll on them all, but Cruz had proven herself time and time again as a reliable force in the field. "Move out," Arya commanded, gripping the ladder with both hands and beginning the climb. Garrett followed behind her, his injured leg slowing him down, but he refused to fall behind. Each rung felt like an eternity. The wind howled louder, whipping debris through the air. The jungle below seemed to swirl with danger, but they couldn't afford to look back. The comm tower's top was a maze of wires and equipment, long abandoned, but still functional enough for their purposes. Arya reached the top first, her boots scraping against the metal surface as she pulled herself up. She immediately moved to the communications panel, her hands flying over the buttons, trying to establish a connection. "Hurry," Garrett called, gasping for breath as he joined her. "We're running out of time." "I know," Arya muttered, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. The panel flickered, struggling to connect, but she didn't let panic creep in. Her training had prepared her for moments like this, when every second mattered. Finally, the screen came to life, the connection to the Terran fleet pinging on the screen. It was weak, unstable, but it was there. "I've got it," Arya said, her voice strained. "But we've got incoming. They're here." From below, the unmistakable sound of heavy boots crashing through the underbrush echoed upwards. Arya didn't need to look to know who it was. Korok Varn, the Varkari general, and his elite troops were coming for them. "We can't hold them off forever," Garrett said, glancing down at the advancing forces. "We need to make this count." "Just get the message out," Arya snapped, her voice cold with resolve. "I'll handle them." With a final, desperate push, Arya sent the distress signal through, her fingers trembling as the data transferred. But the second she hit the send button, the ground trembled beneath them. The jungle, as if responding to their presence, seemed to come alive with a vengeance. The sky darkened further, and the wind picked up, howling in a deafening crescendo. "Captain!" Garrett shouted, pulling Arya back from the console. "We're not alone." Arya whipped around just in time to see the massive Varkari soldiers crashing through the jungle, their red eyes blazing with fury. At their helm was Korok Varn, towering over the others, his dark armor reflecting the storm's lightning strikes. He was unyielding, his presence suffocating the air around him. "You really think you can win this?" Korok's voice was low, laced with contempt. "This world will belong to the Varkari. Your resistance ends here." Arya's heart raced, but she stood firm, her voice unwavering. "This world will never be yours. Not while I still draw breath." Korok sneered, raising his blade. "Then die with it." The first wave of soldiers advanced, weapons raised, and the battle erupted with brutal force. Arya dove for cover, her rifle firing in quick succession as she moved to engage. The Varkari soldiers were trained and merciless, but Arya had something they didn't: human ingenuity. She moved like a shadow, darting in and out of cover, every shot hitting its mark with lethal precision. Garrett joined the fight, his rifle booming as he took down two soldiers in quick succession. But even with their superior tactics and weaponry, they were outnumbered. Arya could feel the pressure building, the weight of the battle closing in on them. In the chaos, Arya caught sight of Korok, his hulking form cutting through the fray with terrifying ease. He was heading straight for her, his blade gleaming under the flashes of lightning. "This ends now," he growled, slashing at Arya with the force of a hurricane. Arya dodged, rolling to the side, her heart pounding as the massive blade tore through the air where she had been. She scrambled to her feet, drawing her sidearm. "Not today," she whispered to herself, her body fueled by a raw, burning determination. With a growl, Korok lunged again, but this time, Arya was ready. She timed her movements perfectly, rolling beneath his strike and coming up behind him. Without hesitation, she fired, hitting him square in the side. Korok roared in pain, but the armor held, barely. "I've fought worse than you," Arya spat, advancing. "And I'll keep fighting until the last breath." Korok twisted, his strength overwhelming, but Arya was relentless. She moved with precision, her mind calculating every move, every counterattack. The two were locked in a deadly dance, the sound of their blades clashing ringing through the tower. But Korok was beginning to tire, his movements slower. Arya saw her opening. In one fluid motion, she leaped forward, knocking his blade aside and driving her fist into his chest. He staggered, his massive form crumbling under the force. It wasn't enough to finish him, but it was enough to get the message across: humanity wouldn't be wiped out so easily. As Korok fell to his knees, Arya stood over him, her weapon raised. "You failed." The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in what felt like hours, Arya allowed herself a breath. She had done it. Humanity had survived the first wave. But the war was far from over. The storm above Vaklar had not relented. Its fury intensified, dark clouds swirling in chaotic patterns as if the planet itself had become a battlefield. But the worst was over, or so Arya Steele hoped. The battle had raged for hours, but now, only silence hung in the air. The last of the Varkari troops had been scattered, and the towering form of General Korok Varn lay crumpled at Arya's feet. His once imposing presence was reduced to nothing more than the still body of a fallen giant. But even in victory, there was no time to rest. Arya's heart hammered in her chest as she surveyed the wreckage. Her hands, slick with sweat and blood, gripped her rifle. The jungle seemed too quiet now, the distant howls of the wild things fading into the background. There was something ominous about this silence. "Captain," came Garrett's voice, strained but resolute. He limped over, his leg injury worse than he'd let on. "We've cleared them out. For now." Arya nodded, her eyes never leaving the horizon. "We hold the tower. For now." Cruz, crouching beside a damaged console, gave her a quick glance before turning her attention back to the communications equipment. "We're still receiving a signal from the Terran fleet, but it's faint. They won't be able to get here fast enough. The Varkari are regrouping. We need to leave, or they'll bring reinforcements we can't handle." Arya clenched her jaw. The weight of the decision pressed down on her chest. They could stay and defend, but she knew that even with their skill and resourcefulness, they were vastly outnumbered. Vaklar's deadly environment wasn't just the wildlife or the terrain, it was the brutal truth of their situation. They couldn't win every time. Her gaze flicked to the injured soldiers by the tower. Garrett, Cruz, and the others were wounded, their stamina wearing thin from the prolonged conflict. Her heart twisted at the sight of her team, her family. But the mission was clear. "We're not giving up," Arya said firmly, turning toward them. "We're not retreating. We hold this position, or we die trying." The decision was made. They would defend the tower and send the distress signal again if needed, but they would not abandon their position. Humanity's survival was more than just about them. It was a message to the galaxy: humans will not kneel. Cruz met her gaze and nodded, her face pale but determined. "What's the plan, Captain?" Arya's mind raced. "We need to fortify. We have to make this tower our fortress. If the Varkari come again, they'll expect us to be broken, to scatter. But we're going to show them that they've underestimated humanity's will." The soldiers moved swiftly, gathering what supplies they could, using the rubble from the battle to set up defensive positions around the tower. The structure itself, though old and battered, had a solid foundation. It would serve as their final stand. As the team worked, Arya's thoughts were interrupted by a soft hum from the comm panel. The Terran fleet was coming through. A distorted voice crackled over the static. "This is Terran Command. We've received your distress signal, Captain Steele. Hold your position. Reinforcements are en route. ETA, 6 hours. 6 hours." Arya exhaled slowly, relief flooding her system, but only for a moment. The Varkari would not wait that long. The countdown had begun. 6 hours, Arya murmured to herself. Enough time for one final battle. She turned to her team, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "We've got 6 hours. We don't rest. We reinforce the perimeter and prepare for another wave. And when the fleet arrives, we will be ready." The jungle's silence felt suffocating as night descended. The Varkari had pulled back for the moment, perhaps regrouping for a final assault, but Arya wasn't waiting for them. She had already learned the harsh truth of battle on Vaklar: waiting meant death. As the hours ticked by, the storm above grew more violent. The sky flashed with lightning, casting eerie shadows over the battlefield. Arya kept her eyes on the horizon, knowing the Valkyrie wouldn't give up so easily. They would return. It was only a matter of time. Garrett, now patched up but still limping, sat nearby, staring at the distant jungle. "You think they'll come in full force?" Arya looked over at him, her gaze steady. "They'll come with everything they have left. And we'll be ready." Silence fell between them, broken only by the occasional crackle from the comm panel. Crews, still working on the damaged equipment, had not spoken much since the battle ended. Arya could feel the weight of their fatigue, the toll of the fight pressing down on each of them. But they couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. The first wave of Valkyrie returned shortly after midnight. Their heavy footsteps echoed through the jungle, and the shrill shrieks of the alien creatures that accompanied them echoed in the distance. Arya's team tightened their grip on their weapons, steadying themselves for what was to come. "Stay sharp," Arya ordered, her voice cutting through the tension in the air. "They're coming in waves. We'll take them down, one by one. Don't engage unless you have to." The Valkyrie appeared in a cloud of smoke, their massive forms emerging from the darkness. They didn't hesitate. Their soldiers charged forward, weapons raised, roaring for battle. "Now!" Arya shouted, opening fire. The first shots rang out, hitting the Valkyrie front lines, knocking them back. But the enemy pushed forward relentlessly. The battle had begun in full force. The clash was brutal. Valkyrie soldiers were tough, but they were not prepared for the sheer ferocity of the humans they faced. Each shot fired, each move made, was decisive. The tower held its ground, the humans standing firm in the face of overwhelming odds. Hours passed in the blink of an eye. The jungle was alive with the sounds of battle, the screams of fallen soldiers, the crackle of energy blasts, the clash of metal against flesh. But with each Valkyrie soldier that fell, Arya's team pushed further toward victory. The Valkyrie were no longer an unstoppable force. They had met the one species in the galaxy that could stand against them and survive. By the time the reinforcements arrived, the Valkyrie had retreated, their pride shattered by the resilience of humanity. The Terran fleet descended from the sky, a great shining beacon in the storm. The battle for Vaklar was over. Arya Steele stood tall, battered but unbroken. As the fleet landed and her team regrouped, she allowed herself a single, fleeting thought: they had won. But the war for humanity's place in the galaxy had just begun.